Hi everyone, thanks for joining us today for the MISO Summer Outlook. Just want to let you know if you have any questions you can fill out in the right side of the panel. There's a question box and we'll try and get to those at the end of the webinar. And I want to introduce to you today John Tipatis, who's one of our analysts on the MISO desk. Go ahead, John.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to go through our summer outlook. First off, we've got just a brief recap of summer 2012. Then we're going to jump into what we're looking at in terms of the weather and demand forecast for the upcoming summer 2013. We'll take a look at some wind generation trends and what we're expecting for the upcoming summer. Then we'll get into not only congestion, but some generation movements that we've been noticing and things that people might want to take a look at. And then we'll kind of wrap it up at the end with a little bit of a summary. So looking at 2013, the upcoming summer, comparing that to the summer of 2012, we should see slightly less heat and less prevalent drought in Indiana, which could lead to a weaker overall peak demand. The weaker levels should lessen the overall congestion risk west to east from Illinois and points to the west towards Indiana and points to the east, especially towards Indianapolis. Some of the top constraint picks for 2013 are expected to include congestion in or around Ireton in western Missouri, Fairfax to Arnold, Beaver Channel-Albany, a Lansing transformer in the southeastern tip of Minnesota, and a Goodland transformer in that Fowler wind area in western Indiana. We also took a look at the loss of the Kewaunee nuke in northeastern Wisconsin and some stronger gas prices, and both of these could make for a bit more of an expensive supply stack, but this should be offset by stronger overall wind generation and new installed capacity that should be coming online coming up shortly. Should the RSG capacity continue to run stronger year over year, overall volatility should be dampened on the whole. So here's a little review of summer 2012. Taking a look at June, we did have an average peak demand for the RTO at about 75 gigs. Looking at July, that number shoots up quite a bit to 89 gigs, and once you get to August, we do see loads kind of trend downwards heading into the fall at just over 77 gigs. You can take a look at the average IndyHub real-time peak settle prices, and obviously, July being the strongest demand month, you're seeing prices almost $20 more compared to June and to August. And in addition, you can also see gas prices trending upwards as you get to July from June, and then trending downwards slightly as you head towards August and then heading into September. Consistent with what we were looking at for monthly averages, the strongest demand day that we saw was July the 23rd of last year. We established a peak demand of 98.1 gigs, had a settle of just over $93 for our IndyHub on peak. It is worth noting that gas prices, at least for that day, were not the highest through the summer, so we did see a little bit of a trend downwards as we got to that strongest demand day in July. Taking a look at the top constraints for 2012, we'll take a look at the day-ahead constraints first. The number one from last year was North Belding to Virgin. The number two we had was Bush to Cumberland, or Cumberland to Bush, as many of you guys know it in the real time. This one is related to that Fowler wind area. So we do see often a lot of congestion in that area when the wind is really whipping up. And then it is worth noting three unique constraints or forms of Albany to Beaver Channel, most notably related to Salem to Maquoketa line work. In the real time, pretty similar table. Again, North Belding to Virgin at the top. We attributed the derated Fermi nuke in eastern Michigan and summer loads in Detroit to seeing this constraint so often, not only in the day ahead, but also in the real time. As well, we did get a few more of the Beaver Channel to Albany constraints with that Salem to Maquoketa work continuing. And at the bottom, you see a little bit of competing congestion related to that Fowler wind area. Monticello to East Winnemac congestion, which is actually bearish on Indy Hub. And then we also had Cumberland to Bush congestion, which is bullish on Indy Hub. So now we're going to jump into what our outlook is for summer of 2013. We'll start with demand and with weather. What we're looking at in terms of average temperature deviations, in the western part of the footprint, looking at some above average temperatures, and then as you trend towards the east, you're getting slightly more moderate and cooler temperatures, but still slightly above average on the whole. Over the past 8 years, 7 of the peak load days have occurred on either a Monday, a Tuesday, or a Wednesday. These typically occur during the last week of July or first week of August, which is consistent with what we were seeing in terms of some of the stronger demands and peak loads from last summer. Overall, we're looking for a warmer than normal summer expected across the Midwest, especially heading into some of the more western areas where drought conditions and drought risks would remain most intense. There is some downside. There's some risk for downside in the upper Midwest, while risk to the upside lingers for the southernmost portion of the footprint. Drought conditions may further worsen the upside risk in the southern half of the footprint, but overall, 2013 is shaping up to be a little less hot than that of 2012. In these next couple of graphics, we're just taking a look at the drought comparison. As you can see here, at the end of July, the beginning of August is really when we had the strongest drought conditions last year. On the whole, this is probably going to be the strongest. You'll see the strongest likelihood of those kind of conditions again during 2013. However, obviously, 2012, the drought conditions were much more intense than that of 2011. We are anticipating some weaker drought conditions for the upcoming summer. If you want to take a look at this graphic, we'll see these 2 circles at the bottom in the valleys. This is looking at water temperatures, much cooler, or at least ostensibly cooler, in winter of 2013 than in the winter of 2012. If we do see, cooler temperatures this summer, it should reduce the chance of seeing forced outages at a number of baseload generation units, particularly in western Indiana, due to cooling water temperature being too warm to actually use to cool plants. So there is a moderate correlation between spring drought conditions and summer temperatures over the Midwest over the past 2 years. There are increasing drought conditions year over year in the spring, which help to reinforce warmer than average summers. With little relief so far this year, the region is primed for the potential of some warmer than average summer temperatures. However, like we mentioned before, we are expecting the 2012 levels to be more intense than the upcoming summer levels of 2013. So the cooler start should help to mitigate, but not entirely eliminate, the risk of another summer of above average water temperatures for the region. Next is our wind forecast for the summer. As you can see in this graph, typically when we start to get to June and July is when we reach the historical valleys for overall and aggregate wind generation output. And so as the summer, begins to mark the beginning of the trough in wind production, we are looking at most likely under 30% of installed capacity actually running. So we're expecting similar conditions for summer 2013 wind output, roughly on average, probably about 3.5 gigs of generation. So the west wind typically starts off the summer months showing stronger generation and a higher capacity factor than central wind. But as you get more into the summer, a steady decline is most likely, with the 2 regions nearly identical by the end of the summer. Over the last 2 summers, this pattern has repeated for both 2011 and for 2012. We are expecting a similar pattern for 2013 as well. Next, we'll take a look at some of our bigger transmission calls for the upcoming summer. The first being IATN. This is that IASC-LK-NA-SJ-HA constraint that we often see posted in the real time. Typically, this is more of an off-peak congestion risk. It has to do with the pull of power from the west towards the bigger demand centers, either in St. Louis, southern Illinois, or even Indianapolis further to the east. The reason we see this typically in the off-peak is that's when wind is strongest. So this could definitely be aggravated by any strong overnight wind generation. And the hub effect is bearish on min-hub, bullish on Indy-hub, and points to the east there with a bullish impact on PGMC as well. The next constraint we took a look at and we think has a strong possibility of showing up over the summer, Fairfax to Arnold. We do have line work on tap for this summer starting the 8th of July, running through the 15th of February of next year at Coffee to Coggin on the 115 system nearby. In addition, we do have what looks to be a month-long outage, again on the 115 system at Swamp Fox to Marion. So we could see some bearish min-hub effect if this congestion should arise. Following that is Beaver Channel-Albany. We did see a lot of that last year, most likely seeing it a good amount, coming up into the summer. In fact, a good amount of it the last few days, if anyone's been following MISO very closely. The drivers here are outages at Oak Grove to Galesburg and Oak Grove to Rock Island. We do see this when we have a pull of power eastwards towards ComEd, compensating for a lack of flows from Wisconsin. This does have a bit of a mixed impact on min-hub. As you can see, the effect on the contour map, I would call it a bit more localized in that the hub effects are a bit muted, but tremendous downside on most of Iowa and a solid upside to southern and southwestern Wisconsin. The impact of this on PGMC is bullish. Next, we've got the Lansing transformer. We have some line work on tap at Harmony to Lansing, a long-term outage from the 22nd of April to the 29th of June. We've got Harmony to Genoa out on the 21st of August and the 27th of August, as well as Harmony to Beaver Creek out the 22nd and 28th of August. Typically, a west to east power flow during the summer, maybe when wind generation is at its weakest in that southeastern portion of Minnesota. As you can see, the effect is pretty muted and localized on the contour map and occurs and leads to price separation in southeastern Minnesota. Last, we'll take a look here at the Goodland transformer congestion risk. We have line work at Monticello to Reynolds from the 10th of June to the 28th of June. This is primarily wind-driven by all that wind in that western Indiana, eastern Illinois wind pocket. So when we get a strong push out of that wind pocket in eastern Illinois towards the southern or eastern portions of Indiana and Indianapolis during the peak load days, we often see Goodland transformer congestion. Any kind of steep increase in central zone wind output often leads to congestion in this area. Slightly bullish impact on Indy-hub and a bullish impact on PGMC as well. Next, we'll take a look at some things happening in the world of generation. The first is occurring in the eastern portion of Michigan, what I would call the thumb of Michigan. It's the Huron County Wind Farm, scheduled to be online by the end of June of this year. Connects to Moore Road on the 345 kV system, and it's a new line. This installation is part of a new line of transmission that ITC is working on, designed to run along the thumb of Michigan, through Tuscola, Huron, Sanilac, and St. Clair counties. With this coming online, and it does increase the chance of seeing that Lee to Sandusky congestion. We have correlated Lee to Sandusky congestion with strength in wind generation in that area. The next generation topic to cover is the Kewaunee nuke in northeastern Wisconsin. As we all know, this shut down on May 7th of this year and is quietly enjoying its retirement. This does mark the loss of about 600 megs of baseload generation. We did run our models for the 23rd of July of last year, which was our peak demand day of 2012. Without this unit on, we brought on an additional 500 megawatts of gas-fired generation, as well as moving gas up to better reflect what is happening in the gas markets today. And it did move prices up from that $93 settle by about $7 per megawatt hour. On a more average day under similar circumstances, we're only seeing about a $3 a megawatt hour increase. But in both situations, it appears that the stronger gas prices may have had more of a bigger isolated effect than simply the loss of that unit. So overall, the loss of this unit should ease the push southward from the generation-rich eastern Wisconsin area to the load-heavy ComEd and Chicago area. So ideally, it should reduce pressure along that Pleasant Prairie to Zion corridor. However, right now we do have some outages at Arcadian to Pleasant Prairie, which just finished up, and Zion to Pleasant Prairie, which is still ongoing. And we have noticed some stronger generation from the southeastern portion of Wisconsin, which is still keeping that congestion around. An interesting topic to mention is RSG, or Revenue Sufficiency Guarantee Capacity. As seen above, MISO has been using RSG for capacity much more to start 2013 than it did for the beginning, for the same months of 2012. I think this trend is going to continue, and so there is a risk to see a sharp increase in July 2013 as we approach those stronger demand days during the summer. So with more RSG running for capacity, it could limit some of that real-time volatility that we have been seeing with LMPs and pricing. In southern Indiana, given the outlook for the weaker drought conditions, we would expect to see healthier levels of output from this region for the summer of 2013, more in line with that of 2011. For example, the Wabash River unit, we could see stronger output from that unit, which would mean less of a strong pull from eastern Illinois into western Indiana and further to Indianapolis, resulting in less bullish congestion risk. The last thing we'll just take a look at is some fuel analysis. Looking at Henry Hub pricing, for June, we're looking at just under $4, moving up to July, again, closer to $4, hitting $4 by August. Big difference between the previous year actual gas prices for June at $2.45, for July $2.94, and then for August at $2.85. And then up further north, MichCon pricing, we are seeing some basis versus Henry Hub to the positive side, about a 23-cent premium for June, an 18-cent premium for July, and a 17-cent premium for August. That'll kind of do it for the presentation. I'd like to open up the discussion to any who have questions. So please feel free to write in.
Okay, so before we get started with the questions, first off, just a reminder that we will send out the slides following the presentation today. The first question up is, what is RSG capacity?
RSG capacity is what MISO has been using as of late and what is available to be used to kind of even out real-time volatility. It is supposed to be used for shoring up reliability. However, what we can say about that is that units that don't get picked up in the day ahead because pricing is not favorable are often run for capacity or for RSG, which helps to even out some of that real-time volatility. There's also one other thing I kind of wanted to throw in there in regards to our congestion analysis. So in helping us kind of take a look at constraints and their effect and what some of the drivers could be, I kind of want to point everybody to IATN because it's kind of a broad sweeping constraint. big downside up north and out west. We have been getting some similar congestion recently at Overton with some work at McCready to Montgomery. But I'd like to kind of show everybody from a generation perspective what we can kind of glean from that. What you can see here, hopefully on your screen, is what's part of our power interface. This is our transmission RT product. And what I have highlighted here are a variety of transmission lines that we now monitor. We do have the Iaton to Platte City sub on the transmission interface. In addition, for those kind of taking a look at Overton these last few days, we are seeing some big spikes in flows on that Overton to Sibley line, kind of giving you an indication as to when congestion may arise. Like I said, this is primarily a wind-driven constraint. We do have some new wind farms that are monitored on the power interface here. We've got Cow Branch wind, we've got Farmers City wind, we have Conception wind, and then also Lost Creek Ridge wind monitored here on the transmission RT. So that provides the push. We do have that transmission line work going on at McCready to Overton, kind of in this area. And then you do have that big baseload unit, the Callaway Nuke, which is still on outage and should be on outage through the remainder of the week. And so you can kind of clearly see a west to east kind of path pulling power towards the stronger demand centers, either in St. Louis or further to the east in Indianapolis.
So I think that's all the questions we have. So thank you everyone for attending, and just so you know, we do offer free trials of any of our power services, and we'll be sending you a link to register for any of these trials after the webinar. If you have any more questions, feel free to respond to the email and we'll make sure to get back to you. And if you could please respond to the, I think, 5-question survey at the end of the webinar. It helps us improve our future webinars. Thank you and have a great afternoon.